The title for this morning's talk is Vitality, which is a little bit ironic because I'm not very vital this morning. I didn't have the best of sleep for the last couple nights. We've been talking about limitation and the consequent hardness of limitation in the chemical region of the physical world. We've noted the way that limitation and hardness occurs, and the attitude, especially the legalistic attitude, that is a large part of it. We have looked a little bit at why crystallization occurs, and it's probably one of the most perfect things in the external chemical world. There are few things as perfect as a crystal. Seeing a perfect crystal, especially if there's no veiling in it, is almost a mystical experience in itself, because it's just so clear, so beautiful. You understand the perfection in it. Yesterday we tried to spend some time in looking at how crystallization occurs by taking the most indefinite substance from life spirit and with complete control bringing it down through the realms of thought, desire, etheric energy, and into the physical so that it becomes completely crystallized. We probably mentioned too little about the fact that crystals are perfect, and their hardness is a part of their perfection. The diamond is probably one of the more beautiful, perfect things in material nature, but it's also one of the hardest things in material nature. There are all kinds of things like that we could have looked into, but didn't. What's going on here? I am not recording. I'm going to have to depend on you. I'll need a copy of what you have, I guess. What happened was I left the microphone on yesterday cleaning out for Grace, and so I changed batteries this morning, and apparently I got a bad battery. Perfection is very important for us as Rosicrucian students, because the Rosicrucian philosophy is a very rare and very perfect philosophy. And for that reason, we have to be very careful that we don't harden it and try to materialize it too swiftly. If we did, it would become a beautiful, beautiful gem that had all kinds of consistency within it, but it would be something like a museum relic. And if we were to allow the Rosicrucian philosophy to become dead, to become moribund, that would be a great stress to the brotherhood and to Christ that are behind it. It's painful to live a life of change and vitality and growth, and to be confronted with hardening and crystallization. I think it's an experience we all went through. I went away from home and I went to college and I got involved with all sorts of things, and I'd come home and knowing I had changed and wanted to share all these new things with my parents, only to hear them say, "Oh, you're still the same old Richie. You know, you are as you have always been. There's nothing new about you. You're still the same." And I could see how it happened looking back now. They had known me from infancy, and they saw and were very familiar with the archetype that became my personality. And they knew that archetype extremely well, and they knew it with objectivity. But the way they knew it had ossified. They hadn't kept alive their view of the archetype, so that it took many years and a lot of suffering back and forth between myself and mostly my father. With my mother, she became a Rosicrucian student. She said, anything that could change you from what you were to what you have become, I want some of that. I was pretty wild. I was something of a beatnik at the time, and I got into all sorts of things that they didn't agree with. So eventually it did turn out, and they didn't notice the fact that even when they did know the new me and what I was becoming, they didn't realize that it still worked through the same old archetype, but it worked on the archetype on a much higher level, and that's the way spiritual things are. You can have the same horoscope, and somebody can live a very dullard life of it. It can be hard and very earthly with no spiritual life in, and somebody born right next in the crib right next door, having the identical horoscope, can live it on a much higher level. The horoscope and the archetype are alike in that manner. This living principle of crystallization, of rare life, occurs many ways in life, for better or worse. For me, one way that it has worked, sometimes almost remarkably, with regard to crystallizing new attitudes or being able to consolidate understanding, is in first impressions. Again, if we can keep from ossifying them, first impressions are wonderful, as long as they don't become foregone conclusions. And in this, even in the physical world, there is a kind of spiritual sight. In the Rosicrucian Christianity lecture, there is a differentiation between clairvoyance, insight, and spiritual sight. Clairvoyance literally means when you see something clearly. Insight indicates that you have an intuitive awareness of the spiritual meaning, the spiritual purpose, the intent behind what you are viewing. When you have the two of them together, you have spiritual sight. You both look and see, so that you know inwardly what the thing that is without, what it means. And sometimes we look, for example, we look at the sky, and we intuitively know that it's going to rain, even though it doesn't immediately look like rain. There aren't threatening clouds or anything like that, because we observe some fact of nature long enough for the intuition to connect in, and we know what that means. Sometimes it can even take a good amount of training. Geologists, for example, can look at terrain, and they can look at strata, and they can tell you what happened millions of years ago. It isn't all just science, it's intuition. A geologist will even tell you that. The way it's worked for me is I love people. And sometimes I have a physical world clairvoyance of people, that I can look at people and I can read their faces. Sometimes it's almost like you're looking at the curves the way an artist would look at a curve, or the way a mathematician, like a Riemann surface or something like that. You can look at it and you understand what it means. In fact, I even have a friend that, I have a number of friends that on the first impressions, one woman didn't talk to me for 7 or 8 years because she was new to town, and she comes into this bookstore that I have, and I proceed to look at her and tell her what I see of her character from her face. I read her face. It so happened that she had cancer rising and was a very private person. And she wouldn't talk to me for years. She said, "You're not supposed to do that to me in public." But first impressions can be that way. And I'm only a beginner. There are cases that John Philip Lavater, he was a pastor from Switzerland, was so good at reading faces that a man came to him and said, "Who am I?" And Lavater looked at him, and he says, well, you're this kind of person, and you're that kind of person. And the man says, yes, that's all true. And but who am I? And Lavater looked at him more and said, you're a man of letters, and you do a lot of writing, and it's of this kind of writing and things like that. And the man said, yep, that's all right, but who am I? And Lavater continued to look at him and went more and more into detail into his character, and he said, I think you write like such and such, and I think you wrote this book which I read a few months ago. And the man says, yep, you got it. It is possible to have that sagacious of an observation. In fact, there are cases, all of the Renaissance painters, for example, studied physiognomy. They studied the face and tried to understand the character behind it. Leonardo even has things where he shows a person sneering and snarling, and he shows a lion sneering and snarling, and he shows the same curves in it. In fact, there was an Italian nobleman that one of his friends came to visit him. They visited for a few minutes, and the man says, well, I have to leave now. And the nobleman went over and locked the door and says, you're not leaving. He says, you have lines of expression which are different than physiognomy. Expression is what's happening currently. Physiognomy is what your basic character is. And he says, you have lines in your face that are only present in a person's face when they're conspiring to commit murder. He says, you're my friend, and I don't want you to do that. And the man confessed to it. And so the conspiracy was broken up right on the spot. So there are people that are quite remarkable for that. One of the most long-term first impressions that I've ever had was the first impression of St. Mark's Gospel. It took years for me to begin to understand the meaning of that first impression and to realize that it was true. My first impression of St. Mark's Gospel was that it's almost identical to Matthew, except it's shorter and it's softer. And that was my first impression of it. I didn't know whether it was true or whether I was just liked it because it was more easygoing. And even after I learned that the 4 Gospels, according to tradition, are associated with the 4 bodies that we use for experiencing things and unfolding our consciousness. It took a long time for that to take place. Trying to live a spiritual life is often more a matter of unlearning than of learning. We have to drop our presuming attitudes. We have to drop our dogmas, and we have to see things straightforward. So to a large extent, learning or accepting things, like we have a lot of negative opinions about ourselves, or we have a lot of conceits about ourselves, and each and every one of them blocks us from really understanding the truth of something, or from getting an impression that can go in so that we know the meaning of it. It's very much like St. Mark's Gospel, where Christ Jesus is doing miracles all over the place, but he can't do them in his hometown. And he tells the people, it's because of your disbelief. He was unable to set up a rapport between them so that people could experience more wonderful things. I think this is probably all of our lives are like this, because we don't have a rapport with Christ, and because we don't have a rapport with the living universe, we miss a lot of what is there. Now, the Rosicrucian cosmos conception tells us that the vital body, which is made up of the ethers, the etheric subdivision of the physical world, tells us it's almost identical to the physical body, except that it is polarized opposite of the gender of the physical body, so that all of the females have a masculine vital body and all the males have a female vital body. The only thing that is different is the genital area. The etheric region is much less dense and much more subtle than the chemical region. In fact, the vital body and the etheric subdivision interpenetrate the dense physical body and the chemical globes that we call the planets. In fact, if we can see it with clairvoyance or even feel it inwardly, it's really a great way to feel light. Our physical bodies are suspended within the matrix of ether. We're suspended within our vital bodies. So it should come as no surprise to us that Mark's gospel, if it relates to the etheric body, and the relationship of the etheric body to the physical body is that it is identical, only it's softer, meaning to say it's more interpenetrating. So it's not surprising that the two gospels should be very much alike. Now, I don't want to make a big deal of that, because if we overemphasize things that are traditions or gimmicks or things like that to get at the truth, there's always a problem from that. Overemphasis never works out. If we did start pointing and saying, well, the vital body is like St. Mark's gospel, we could start getting into being ostensive Bible and Rosicrucian interpreters. You know what I'm saying? There are people that go around and point. They don't give you meaning. They don't give you understanding. They point and they say, oh, this disciple relates to this zodiacal sign, or this woman relates to this vortex in the desire body. And they make all sorts of things like that. And they're neat and they're pretty and they may even be true. But you can't get much out of it. You know, the Gospels are mystery myths. They are something that we have to live, and only to the extent that we can live a gospel, live the life of Christ, which is a cosmic life, which is a cosmic myth, only to that extent can we understand the meaning. Otherwise, we just become finger pointers. We say this is this and this is that, and that is, that's how things go. Ostensive assignations may or may not be true, but they're only valuable when they give us something to understand and something we can use. Everything in life is use, and that use, when we voluntarily give ourselves to it, in the Rosicrucian philosophy, is called service. When we're serving the universe, we're participating in the very best way possible that a human being can participate. Everybody wants to participate. Everybody wants to be part of something. And when we see truth in the universe and serve its intents and purposes, we are participating in a way that we find acceptance that we can in no other way. It's a wonderful, wonderful way of living. Otherwise, we become symbolists. And symbolism, as lovely as it is materialism. The mystery schools used to teach about symbols, that a symbol conceals as much as it reveals. It can be a passageway to the inner worlds, but it is still an object, and it still stands between you and direct perception. It's sort of like if you love somebody. You don't want to have something between you. You know what I mean? You want to love a person as if there are no barriers. And materialism and symbolism and things like that are barriers. The vital body, relative to the physical body, is the vehicle of suggestion. Suggestion is one of the strongest tools with regard to the vital body. So it shouldn't be surprising when Christ Jesus tells the hometown people, it's because of your unbelief that I did not perform great miracles. That is, they were closed to suggestion. They were closed to developing a relationship of rapport so that they could participate in the miracles that Christ did. Christ said it quite clearly, I of myself can do nothing. Everything has to be done. You can't just walk out and heal somebody. There has to be a relationship where the patient wants to be healed and is in a posture to accept what is necessary to make the changes to be healed before the healer can have the relationship to God so that the healing force can be brought in to make the change. So suggestion has a lot to do with performance of any kind of work in the chain of crystallization as it comes through the vital body or as it comes through the etheric world. They were closed to positive suggestion because they were filled with negativity. This guy, we know him. He can't do this. This is just like when my parents said, "Oh, you're the same old Richie." When I said, "I've changed, I'm different." It's a very difficult thing. You have to open people up. People have to be open before they can be loved, or before the magical forces can be brought through the ethers to make a transformation. This is the way prestidigitation developed. You know what prestidigitation is? That's sleight of hand, where people do apparent magic tricks. The true magicians developed prestidigitation because they could do these little things with sleight of hand, and that produced an open consciousness. And when people were open, then you could zap them with you could bring in the light and the life force. This view of Matthew's gospel as relating to the vital body does coincide with the other tradition that we talked about, where Matthew's gospel was associated with Leo. Unfortunately, they don't all fit so nicely. We mentioned before that Venice, for example, is called the City of Lions, and in St. Mark's Square there are lions everywhere, stone lions. So this tradition has been known for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. But in astrology, cosmological astrology, the ethers are ruled by Aquarius. But the individual etheric vital body, which was developed in the Sun period, is ruled by Leo and the Sun. So it's not surprising then that there would be the positive vitality that streams to us from the Sun being associated with St. Mark's Gospel. And it's not surprising that in St. Mark's Gospel that there would be a lot of suggestion. If you look in St. Mark's Gospel as opposed to St. Matthew's Gospel, it is a Gospel where the words of Christ Jesus are commands. The leonine side, or when you speak to the etheric body, you repeatedly give it positive suggestions in the form of commands. All right, now let's look a little bit at the macroscopic view. In St. Mark's Gospel, there are only one direct and one indirect prophecy. So we're already out of the tradition-bound, the very hard physical history gospel that is St. Matthew's Gospel. We're in something now where, because the stuff of prophecy lives in the ethers. Everything is alive. You can see things before they come to pass in the physical plane because they're right in the energy streaming down the stream of crystallization. And what is the need of prophecy if you have the source and the substance of prophecy flowing right through? Also, if we look in St. Mark's Gospel, we find that there is less need to bring meaning to people by the use of dreams. Dreams, it's like I think it's the book of Revelation that says your young people will have visions, but your old people will dream dreams because they're sort of all hardened and, we've lived our lives and we're fixed in our physical bodies and we have to dream if we're going to have spiritual experience. We also do not find the harsh legalism and the hardness that is like the chemical region. In fact, all we find are firm commands. Command is the form that suggestion takes in the etheric realm. The strongest suggestions are like post-hypnotic suggestions, where a person does something automatically and they don't know why. The hypnotist tells somebody that when I touch my nose, even after you've waked up, you're going to crow like a rooster. And the hypnosis is broken. The hypnotist starts conversing with the person and reaches up and touches his nose, and the person starts going cock-a-doodle-doo and has no idea of why it took place. It's because the suggestion takes the form of a command. Within limits, the vital body can do very much by the process of suggestion. The limits are important. We can't suggest to ourselves that when we wake up tomorrow morning we're going to solve Maxwell's equations, which have never been completely worked out. We just can't say that that's going to happen. But we can suggest to ourselves that we're going to wake up at 5:37 tomorrow morning. I don't even want to say it too loud or too strong, because otherwise all of you will wake up at 5:37 in the morning, which wouldn't be bad. You could see the sunrise, but you'd all curse me for a lack of sleep or something like that. But those sorts of things happen. Or you can do one of the most common forms of suggestion is one that Glenn was talking about the other day, and that is if you lift weights, you suggest to yourself that you can do a little more. And by golly, you do a little more. It's surprising how many people go from physical therapy into spiritual study. We have a one-time probationer of the Rosicrucian Fellowship that did that very, very thing, that went from physical therapy into a very deep and rich spiritual life. To the extent that we are open, to the extent that we are believing, and that we don't fight things, to that extent suggestion can work. We can fill our own consciousness with positive suggestions, and that's very careful. You have to be very careful, because suggestion, there's always a black box. The suggestion goes into our vital body, and after a time it comes out, and it seems like a miracle. And if we too much stress suggestion and give it too much credence, and then try to do something that suggestion cannot fulfill, we can be disillusioned and we can drop away from a lot of spirituality, which is something that does sometimes happen. But provided that we're careful about it, we can make all kinds of positive suggestions to ourselves, and we can even say positive things and put positive thoughts and make them available to other people, but you have to be very, very careful. Now, in the ages when the vital body is developing or being reborn, between the ages of 7 and 14, we see exactly what we would expect to see. We see children having their entire identity in their vital body. Everybody wants to say it. See how I've grown? See how I've grown? And then, you put the marks along the door and everything like that, and the child identifies with that. And children at that age, especially the first half of the age between 7 and 14, are very open to command. They like to be in things where people who are a little bit older than them tell them what to do. They may try to resist it to some extent, but this is the time where one develops excellent discipline in a child. They take commands or they take obedience, and it grows up. So knowing this, we have to realize the potential danger of negative suggestions. I'll give you an example of what I think is one of the worst kinds of negative suggestions. If a child is identifying with growing up to be healthy and saying, I'm a little bigger. I'm a little bigger. There are ages that children go through that they absolutely cannot stand vegetables. That this is where you have to do some commanding, but even then it is not successful. After a while, it kicks in again and they like vegetables. But how many parents have you ever heard say to their children, if you don't eat your vegetables, you're not going to grow up to be big and strong? That is attacking the strongest, the most important thing in the age of that child. That child is identifying with growth and is identifying with vitality, and you're attacking the central thing. And if you start putting in negative suggestions in that way, you are limiting a person. So we have to be very careful about the kind of suggestions that we place, especially with children, especially with people who are open to growing. Even in adults, if we produce contradictory suggestions, the vital body tries to carry out both at the same time. And it produces sort of a schizophrenia or a flip-flop of the vital body when you're suggesting to someone to do something and then to do the opposite at the same time. And they grow up with an attitude, I'm sure you've heard of it, it's the hangdog kind of attitude where the person becomes exceedingly aware of contradiction. And they walk around saying, damned if you do, damned if you don't. It's the kind of suggestions that are contradictory that have been put into their vital body since a very early age. So we have to be really careful even about positive suggestions. Every step that we get closer to God has a greater responsibility to it. And every step closer to God, we must live like God. In the Orphic Mystery School, the three qualities of the Trinity were associated with truth, beauty, and goodness. The truth was associated with the Holy Ghost, or the human spirit, in that it is focused in the region of thought, and even in the Gospels it's called the Spirit of Truth. The beautiful was associated with the altruistic, the Christ love that radiates through the life spirit. But the ultimate purpose behind all things, the intention behind all things, was good. And the good was associated with the divine spirit or with the Father. So every step that we take closer to that ultimate divinity means we must be more and more careful about morality and about ethics. Anything we say to someone is a suggestion. And sometimes even if we note a fact, if we note it with great clarity, that can put a very negative suggestion in somebody's consciousness. So with ethics. Since we're talking about ethics, the greatest abuse of suggestion is hypnotism. Hypnotism, from the spiritual point of view, is assault and battery. It is when we place our thoughts through the ethers in someone else's body to countermand what the spirit within them wants. Even if the person is psychologically masochistic and asks to be hypnotized, we're still responsible for assaulting their freedom. The sovereignty of their own personality is violated any time we hypnotize. It's a very, very important thing. You might call it, since we have mostly women in the group, and women would be very sensitive to it, it is a form of psychological rape. So we must be careful even of our positive suggestions. Probably the best thing we can do is to get people to make their own positive suggestions to themselves. But even there, we have to be ethically scrupulous to the nth degree, because otherwise people will begin to think that the whole spiritual life and spiritual practice is self-suggestion, which it is not. Because self-suggestion carried too far becomes auto-hypnosis. Auto-hypnosis where you start doing things and you don't even know why you're doing things. We are trying to wake up. The value of the spiritual life is that we wake up more and more to reality as time progresses. Therefore, any spiritual exercise that we do must be consonant with our end and with our intent. Our exercises should be performed when we're wide awake, and that they should promote greater waking consciousness all the way through them. If our exercises are not performed with waking consciousness, and if they do not promote greater waking consciousness, their value is suspect. All right. I don't mean to be so strong about all of that, but it's a really important thing.
Well, you're commanding.
I hope not. I was trying to use the inclusive we, not the royal we, but the inclusive we. We're trying to get at a sane mind, a soft heart, and a sound body. So let's start looking very, very briefly at the constitution of the vital body and ways that we can promote health and healing in it. In the Rosicrucian Cosmoconception, we're taught that the etheric region of the physical world is composed of 4 ethers. These 4 ethers are described in the Rosicrucian terminology according to function. That is the function that they have, especially in human endeavor. Our human vital bodies are composed of the same 4 ethers because we have evolved through the experience of life and vitality with those ethers, and so we can relate to them by being part of them. So with extreme brevity, we're going to look at the 4 ethers with a focus on the human vital body. The chemical ether relates to the chemical region of the physical world, and it's responsible for all chemical change and activity in that world. Basically, what would be called energy by physics is chemical ether. In the human vital body, where it is incorporated into a macrocosmic organization, it functions just a little bit differently. It's associated with chemical action, not merely just the breaking down of foods by acids and enzymes in the GI tract, but all of the chemical actions in the body. At the positive pole of the chemical ether is where things are absorbed and assimilated into the physical body. This is analogous to what physiologists call anabolism. At the negative pole of the chemical ether is where things are excreted or thrown out or wasted from the living cells in our bodies. And the whole process of elimination, which in physiology is called catabolism. So the whole metabolism that is made up of anabolism and catabolism is ruled by the chemical ether. The life ether corresponds directly to the etheric region of the physical world, and it's responsible for vitality, for action, for a lively life. It's what makes the difference between organic and inorganic chemistry. Anything that lives has the life ether in it. Everything that does not have the life ether in it is not alive. In the human vital body, it does all of these things, vitalization, and it carries it right down to the cellular level. And the life ether is especially associated with the growth function of vitality, which is reproduction. So even in the reproduction of cells, but especially in the reproductive process for the ongoing perfection of human bodies, the life ether is active, such that at the positive pole of the life ether, all gestative activities are performed, especially the development of the ova. The eggs, as means for carrying on the evolutionary activity, are the result of the positive pole of the life ether. At the negative pole of the life ether is the differentiative function. We differentiate through the positive pole. So you might say, I don't know this as a fact, I haven't had a chance to really look into it yet, but stem cells are more like the positive pole, and the differential cells, the specialized cells, are more like the negative pole of the life ether. So that the most special differentiation is the differentiation of sperm cells. And so the whole idea of genetics and hybridization and all of that has to do with the positive pole of the life ether. The light ether corresponds to the desire world, and it is responsible for the things of the desire world: coloration, sense perception, and moving life to action. In these functions, it is most active in the positive pole of the light ether in the body, in the blood. It heats the blood and drives the blood, and the driven blood is what is responsible for movement, for action. At the negative pole of the light ether in the human body, it activates all pigmentation, and it sets up all receptivity for sense perception. So all of the images that we later form in the desire body as a consequence of perception are received through the negative pole of the light ether. The reflecting ether corresponds to the world of thought. And the world of thought has a special resonance with the etheric brain in the human body, so that thoughts can be transferred very, very quickly. At the positive pole of the human vital body is where thoughts are propagated and communicated and ramified into as many ramifications as the intensity of the thought had and was capable of ramifying, most especially in the etheric brain again. At the negative pole of the reflecting ether in the human vital body, it is highly, highly receptive, such that it's so receptive that anything that comes on it is impressed into it and held. So what is called the photographic memory, or the memory of nature, as it is in our lives of everything that has happened in us, is in the negative pole of the reflecting ether. The control of the reflecting ether requires a good deal of skill, because if one specializes one pole over the other, it can lead to a split kind of consciousness. So for example, like mnemonists who can memorize an entire phone book with one read-through are very poor at logical thinking, whereas logical thinkers are not always good at memory or at forming impressions as in memory. They get abstracted. All right. The chemical and life ethers are called in the Rosicrucian philosophy either the lower ethers, but probably they are best called the biological ethers. The biological ethers are necessary for the continuance of life of the dense physical body. And so they always stay with the dense physical body and leave only partially. When the biological ethers are removed or when they are strained as in trance or as in shock, it is of great detriment to both the biological ethers of the body and the physical body itself. Shock is very hard on the physical body. The biological ethers are the ethers that form the matrix of the physical body, and they remain relatively constant throughout life. They do change shape according to the archetype, and in general, the biological ethers diminish such that as we get older, we seem to get tinier, especially in the amount of vitality that we have. Oh my goodness, we got 10, 12 minutes and two and a half pages of notes. Woo. Oh. Yes.
Put it over on the next lecture.
No, the vital flux of the biological ethers is variable. Beside the vital body, there is a stream of energy that comes from the sun that varies. It varies according to our age, according to our health, according to illness, and according to hygiene. Even soul growth. If we take more of our etheric energy and put it into the two higher ethers, we sometimes diminish in physical health because we're taking more of our stock and putting it in that, which is probably a good idea. If we're going to be trying to grow spiritually, we are going to expect to suffer anyway. How can we grow unless we get rid of the backlog of destiny we have? And the only way to get through the backlog of destiny, much of which is not as nice as what we are now. So we have a lot of heavy stuff to go through. All right, we're only just touching on these things. Touching on a very few little things and hoping that it will take. That everybody will get re-enthused. There are many kinds of chemical reactions that take place, but they are of two basic kinds, roughly speaking, ionic and enzymatic. In a very simple way, each of these two kinds of actions gives us hints for having a sound body. The ionic reactions relate more to the activities of the chemical ether and inorganic chemistry. Simply stated, the physical body and the etheric body require certain mineral enzymes. They are necessary to be part of the constitution of our body, to be part of the interactions or reactions that keep our body going, and even if they are not part of the actions, their presence must be there. Almost as an alchemical, astrological setting up of a field. We must have these things. If we don't, we'll suffer some form of deficiency. Studying biochemistry, or studying nutrition, or astrology is helpful. But again, each person is individual. Each person has specific needs for ions. There are relative positives and negatives. Limits, upper limits and lower limits of different ions for your body. And there's something really We should really be very technical about this, but we don't have time. So experimentation is very good. For example, it's very good to study things like biochemistry. Like we need phosphorus in order for our neural activities. But we can't get phosphorus unless we have calcium. But if we have too much calcium, the body excretes phosphorus. So we have to understand those kinds of limits. And we have to be careful when we take what source of calcium we take in, and we have to be careful that we don't take it at the same time with something that is magnesium rich, because the valence. I'm trying to go too fast now. The valency of magnesium is the same as the valency of calcium, only it is much more highly reactive. So if we take in something rich in magnesium, we won't get the calcium into us, because in the race for the ionic interaction, the magnesium is going to win. So it's really, it's something that keeps us off the streets by studying things like this. And we have to be very careful about allowing opinions to enter into this. Because sometimes health things, when I lived here, during the 3 years I lived here, there were more arguments about what should be served in the cafeteria than there were in the philosophy classes. And your opinion can really get in the way of this. I have a friend who is a chemist that has some renown in the world of chemistry, and he once went and took studies of cobalamin in people who lived according to a very strict kind of diet. I won't mention the society that's involved. And he went to their convention and offered to do tests for cobalamin, which is B12. That's something I'd like to get into. It's a very deep thing. It's a wonderful thing about biochemistry and colors and a whole bunch of other things, but we just don't have time for it. And the results were that most of the people in this society, over half of the people, were cobalamin deficient. Not so bad that they were having collapsed spines, but they were on their way to it. He presented the facts to them. No lecture, just presented the facts to them, and they just pushed it all aside because they had this religious fervor about what a right diet is, and they didn't want to know the fact that they were deficient, and they would take their religious fervor about their nutrition over a healthy physical body. So it's something that we have to be very scientific and not have a lot of opinions. So I'm going to turn around and give you an opinion. I think a lot of the best. I'm very strong on taking living foods as the means to get our ions. I think anything that's in a crystalline a state of existence, whether it's white sugar or salt or anything like that, anything that's crystal is very hard for our body. And if we can get our ions from colloid sources, we're much more likely to have a healthy body. If we look at enzymatic reactions, we're looking more into organic chemistry, where the life ether is more dominant in the chemical actions. Enzymes are catalysts and agencies whereby all of the balances, living balances, take place in our body, sometimes at the rate of thousands per second. Enzymes are necessary, and enzymes require a live diet. Some enzymes can be generated in our body by our vital body, but some must be taken in from without. No diet that has ever had no living food in it has ever been successful. At one time, the Germans took the pride of the German Navy and they put them out on a U-boat, and they advertised the fact that they were going to be using only rations and there would be no live food, and for this way they could stay underwater a long time. And after months, they came back, and every one of them suffered deficiency diseases to the point that some of them even died, that their health was undermined. So there is no substitute for living food because it is where the life is. I highly recommend reading Occult Principles of Health and Healing by Max Heindel, because he very clearly describes the difference between chemical nutrition and etheric nutrition, the two of which run opposite to each other. For the physical body, cooked food is easier to take in and make part of the body. But for the vital body, raw, live food is necessary. I recommend juicing, especially vegetable juices. They have more of the enzymes and they have much more of the etheric energy. In fact, if you leave a glass of vegetable juice stand for 15 minutes, it's gone. The enzymes and if you take a glass of carrot juice or a glass of spinach juice or something like that and put it down right straight out of the juicer, and get a kind of juicer where you use a press, not one of those with a centrifuge, because that oxidizes the enzymes and you lose them all. The chemical tests that have been done for enzymes, the type where you triturate first and then press, you get much more enzymes, and enzymes correspond to the etheric energy. I'm going so fast, I don't know if we're ever going to get done with all of this. I want to talk about all of this. It's necessary that we take the life ether in from the plant kingdom. And this comes to a very important spiritual principle. It's one that Max Heindel stated a number of times. It could be called the principle of sacrifice and coevolution. If God or if the cosmos stayed in one homeostatic state, there would be no growth. There would be no evolution. There would be no sharing. Nothing would get better. Out of the love of God, God differentiated itself. And in that differentiation, coevolution immediately became necessary. Because in the differentiation, each of the parts needed each other. And there could be no progress without them. This whole process of differentiation, as it comes down through all of the planes, becomes progressive. And the attitude behind it is sacrifice. We sacrifice something for the sake of something else. The intent of sacrifice is to give and is to share. The effect of sacrifice is more like the effect of sacrifice in a game of chess, where you give up a piece and you get something back more valuable. You cannot sacrifice with a pure heart and give everything up without ever hoping to get anything back and have it happen that way. You always get back much more than you ever thought you would, you ever intended. When we gave up the ability to take in the life energy, we take some of it in through the solar plexus, and we take it in through the spleen, and we differentiate it in the solar plexus. We take some energy in that way, and we take in through what is called sunshine vitamin D, which is much more than having sunlight cascade through a bunch of steroids, as the chemists say. There's much more to it than that. But basically, we cannot do as the plants do. We cannot take the living life from the sun and attach it to minerals and produce a vital body for it. We sacrifice that ability in order to become mobile, to have motility, and to have the motivation to do so. The animals have done the same thing. All animals and all humans need the plants to continue to exist, to have a vital body to continue to exist. Even the plants, in order to gain that ability to give life as their service, they sacrifice the permanency of form that the minerals have. So all of what we are participating in is a continuous, gigantic sacrifice, and each sacrifice gives us the opportunity to serve, and it makes us codependent in a positive sense, or interdependent in a positive sense, so that we all grow together. It's a co-evolutionary quality. So the whole thing that I'm trying to say is that we need the service of the plants. They give us a vitality that's richer than any other source, except maybe milk right straight out of an animal, or blood right straight out of an animal, which is not something we're really wanting to do. Because of this differentiation, it brings out another point about nutrition. Before we can make something part of us, we have to overcome it. Because of differentiation, each creature has done its own thing. And to make it part of us, we must overpower it just in the same way that God overpowers everything in the whole cosmos. It's all part of God, and because that power is there, all of the things can be done. This is called, in the Rosicrucian cosmoconception, the law of assimilation. If we want to have sound bodies, physical and etheric, we want to take in foods that are low on the evolutionary chain if we possibly can, because they're easier to overcome and they stay part of us longer. I have a lovely anecdote at this point. I have romantic interests now and then, and I met this young woman, and we were talking, and she was a little bit skeptical about vegetarian, but she thought that was all right. And she said, but what do you do for protein? That's the question that always comes up. And I said, I eat pond slime. And and there was a long silence, and she looked at me quizzically, and she said, you're serious, aren't you? Needless to say, that didn't last too long. Oh, boy. Let's just drop that for a minute and talk about something. We're a little overstayed. I'm going to do about 3 or 4 minutes. Let's talk about soul food. That is the food for the higher ethers, which are called the soul ethers, the soul body part of the ethers. If we want to enrich our light ether, the more we focus on perception, of seeing things clearly, the more we enrich the positive pole of the light ether in our being. Since the light ether corresponds to the desire world, that means there's an element of morality. The more we see things for what they are and see the moral good in them, the beauty in them, the more likely we are to attract the higher substance of the light ether into our body. At the positive pole of the light ether, the positive pole of the light ether heats the blood. This does not mean that the more hot-blooded we become, the more saintly we are. Otherwise, the streets would be filled with saints for all the hot-blooded people there are. It means that the more that we use our bodies, the more that we use the positive pole of the light ether to drive us to do something. We have to do something. We have to act. We have to change. We have to carry things out. We have to experience. And the more we do of that, the more we attract the positive pole of the light ether. I have a story. I have a friend that was so sensitive that they tried to build an entire psychic institute around her. And about that time, I came into her life and told her, maybe negative sensitivity isn't the best thing. And I introduced her to the Rosicrucian teaching, and there it all went. She just threw it all away, and she tried to live the spiritual life. But like many people who are very sensitive, she was psychically negative, and she was psychologically negative, and sometimes a very demanding person. And a friend of mine, who is, some of you know him, he comes out here once in a while, he was helping her out at one time, and she was just having this fit of temperamentality, and he just loved her all the way through it. And she said, I saw a little curl of gold go into his aura, and then it disappeared into it. And that's what happens when you drive the blood, when you do something with the moral sacrifice, with the love of the higher desire world. If you carry that through the positive pole of the light ether, that's what you develop. Oh boy. Let's just very, very quickly, we're cutting about a good quarter of the talk here. To develop the reflecting ether in ourselves means to exercise it. The soul ethers are more like the higher bodies. The soul ethers are improved and perfected and strengthened by use. So the more we consciously think, the more we look at things and think about them. It doesn't have to be according to any special science. It doesn't have to be according to any literary genre or anything like that. But if we do original thinking. I recently saw the Dalai Lama, and I was as close to him as I am to Glenn. And it was obvious when people asked him questions, he wasn't answering them according to any doctrine. He was a concentrator. You could see that he was a concentrator because he went right directly to the issue, and he thought, and he spontaneously created his thoughts right on the issue. And that's what we, as Rosicrucian students, want to do. We want to think and think at all times, because the more we do, the more we develop the positive pole of the reflecting ether. And of course, retrospection, memory, getting at those living pictures that contain all the feelings and everything else, develop the negative pole of the reflecting ether. At this point, we have to quit. So let's end with the Rosicrucian prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer.